Snow exploded in front of them in long, stitched lines, as if some invisible claw were raking the valley clean. The point man went down first. 1 second, he was slogging through waist-deep powder, rifle angled toward the notch in the ridgeline ahead, breath a white metronome in the thin air. The next, his chest snapped backward in a mist of red, and he crumpled into the snow, his ruck twisting his body into an awkward half-turn. "Contact left! Contact right!" the squad leader bellowed, voice already thin against the thunder of gunfire. The valley was nothing but white and rock and the malicious sparkle of muzzle flashes. Daylight burned off the slopes, so brightly the world seemed overexposed. The small joint patrol, 12 bodies in mixed uniforms and gear, vanished into whatever dips they could find, clawing at crusted snow with gloved hands, trying to make themselves smaller than physics allowed. A machine gun on the left wall of the valley opened up in long, confident bursts. Snow fountained in front of the patrol, the rounds walking toward them with metronomic inevitability. Another gun on the right flank joined in, offset, so that anywhere the patrol tried to move, one or the other would catch them. "Breaker, this is Torch 1, troops in contact, troops in." The radio dissolved into a sheet of static. 3 different voices overlapped, then cut off mid-syllable. The squad leader slapped the side of his headset as if he could knock the sound back into shape. "Net's jammed," he shouted to no one in particular, already knowing everyone else had realized the same. "We're in the box. This is an L-shaped kill zone." Round smacked into the low berm he ducked behind, spitting ice and dust into his face. The berm was a joke, nothing but wind-packed snow banked against stone. It gave the illusion of cover, the way a sheet gives the illusion of warmth in an Arctic night. "Medic!" somebody screamed. "Doc, get to Larson." The medic was already moving, crawling through the powder on elbows and knees, the big aid bag dragging behind, the red cross on its flap the only color besides blood and muzzle flash. Each movement pushed him up into the enemy's line of fire. Each movement put a little more of him where bullets were ripping the air apart. Above all this, the valley's walls reared up in sheer slabs of rock, fractured and streaked with ice. The enemy had dug themselves into every crack that mattered. Dark shapes hunched behind boulders, machine guns anchored on tripods. Somewhere higher still, invisible except when a muzzle flash winked, a hidden sniper watched the whole thing with the dispassionate angle of a god. Mortars thumped from farther back, soft, heavy sounds that didn't belong in such brittle cold. A few seconds later, the first round dropped short of the patrol, punching a geyser of powder skyward. The next fell long. They were bracketing, feeling for center. The patrol had nowhere to go. Forward was a funnel, backward was open ground they'd already walked and which targets had been set for. Left and right were vertical death. Up on the crest of the northern ridge, where the wind never stopped and the snow never settled, someone lay perfectly still beneath a crust of white and burlap. The ghillie suit was an uneven layer of netting, fabric strips, and frozen snow. It swallowed the shooter's shape, turned her into a part of the barren slope. Only the faint rise and fall at her ribs gave her away, that in the line of the rifle cradled into her shoulder. Her cheek pressed into the cold metal of the stock. Frost rhymed the edge of the scope and the skin around her eye. Each breath she let out fogged the eyepiece. A tiny cloud she had to time her blink around. 730, she whispered, more to feel the number in her mouth than to hear it. Wind quartering left to right. Call it full value at .8. Down below, the patrol shouts were broken by the static roaring in her earpiece. The main net was gone, ripped apart by the enemy's jamming. When the static dipped, she heard fragments, Stone's voice, clipped and tight, somebody else calling for air, another voice reciting a contact report that would never reach higher. She ignored them. The valley was talking louder. Her scope tracked along the left wall, found the first machine gun brazenly chewing up the ridgeline, then moved on. That gun was important, but not yet. The medic was halfway to the fallen point man now, and the real threat was the glint of optics on the right wall, higher, where an enemy shooter lay waiting to cut the medic in half. A memory uncoiled at the edge of her focus, uninvited. dirt instead of snow, summer heat instead of cold burn. Live fire lanes at basic. The instructor's voice. Stay in formation, stay in your lane, no matter what. You move out of line, you're a liability. Somebody had panicked, frozen in the open while the others advanced. She'd broken rank without thinking, hauling him by his vest, dragging both of them into cover. The drill had halted. The instructors had swarmed. The word failure had been written in ink that felt permanent. You failed basic, you're done here. The main instructor had hissed, the clipboard snapping shut like a verdict. Another mortar dropped in the present, distant thunder echoing off the rock. She blinked, forcing the old scene away. It had weight, but it didn't belong to this valley. This valley needed only numbers, angles, cause and effect. The enemy sniper's muzzle flashed again. Just a flicker, a star appearing and dying in the same breath. The shot chased the medic, chewing a line in the snow inches from his hip. If the shooter had been just a touch lower. She rolled the dial on her scope, compensating for the slope. The wind curled down the valley like a living thing, swirling and splitting against invisible contours. Snowflakes drifted across her sight picture, tiny, slow meteors she could measure time against. "Hold," she murmured. "Hold, hold." The medic reached the point man, grabbed his vest, started to pull. The enemy sniper adjusted. The muzzle flash blinked again. She exhaled. The world constricted down to a crosshair and that tiny, incandescent bloom. Her finger took up slack, then pressure. Her rifle barely kicked at all. The suppressed report was a dull cough lost in the wind. Down on the wall, the muzzle flash stuttered and went abruptly still. The enemy shooter jerked backward, a small, almost polite movement, then rolled out of sight. The medic flinched, looked around wildly, not understanding why he was still alive. In the valley, the effect was a momentary gap in the pattern of violence. One less line of tracers stitched the air. It was less a reprieve than a slightly shallower trough in the wave, but it was enough for hearts to pound once more, lungs to grab a full breath. "Who the hell just saved us?" someone screamed, voice ragged. No one answered. The radios were still dead, and the bullet that had done it came from somewhere they couldn't see. The enemy answered instead. The machine guns on the left wall sped up. The ones on the right shifted arcs, spraying toward where the shot must have come from, or might have. Mortars found a closer bracket. One round landed just beyond the patrol, showering them in a mix of ice and rock, the blast smothered by snow, but still heavy enough to punch in ears and rattle teeth. Farther back, on a reverse slope cut just out of her current arc, an enemy commander watched through binoculars. His face was a smear of scarf and goggles. But the body language was clear. Annoyed, not panicked. Curious. He tilted his head, scanning the upper ridges, hand drifting toward the radio at his chest. On her ridge, the sniper peeled one mitten back and checked her watch. The pencil mark overlaid on the face, slashing across the bezel, lined up with the words she'd scratched on her forearm before dawn. Exfil window. The line and the numbers told a story. The helicopters had only so long to be in this air, over these mountains, before weather closed the door. Under her rifle, a row of magazines sat half buried in snow. There were fewer than there should have been for this many targets, for this many unknowns. Logistics had offered what they could. Weight limits had dictated the rest. She ran a gloved thumb across the front of one mag, feeling the metal ridges. She thought about her past, about the word on her record, and about where she was now. They sent the washout up here alone, a dry inner voice observed. But they never asked why she really failed. She shifted slightly, the stock creaking against her coat. Through the cracked edge of her scope, hairline fracture like a spider web radiating from one corner. She watched the enemy commander lift a hand, pointing not at the valley floor, but higher, toward the wind-scoured spine of rock where she lay. How did she end up as the only thing between them and annihilation? The valley seemed to ask back. 3 days earlier, the mountains were merely a jagged backdrop beyond the wire. From the air, the forward operating base looked like someone had dropped a handful of shipping containers and tents at the end of the world. Snowplows carved paths through drifts. Snow tractors hummed, lights blinking in the dim midday. Helicopter rotors chopped lazy circles, blades stirring powder into halos around the landing pads. Inside the operations tent, Warmth fought a losing battle against the cold seeping up from the floor. Space heaters glowed a dull orange. Maps covered one wall. Satellite imagery, printed and laminated, covered another. Commander Stone stood at the center table, thumbs hooked into his belt, shoulders squared under a jacket that had seen more than one deployment. He was built like someone who had grown, used to carrying weight no one could see. His jaw was dark with stubble, his hair cut short enough to be regulation without caring about neatness. An intel officer with a tablet was talking fast. The old listening post at Grid Sierra 7 is here. He tapped a point on the map where the contour lines bunched close together. We abandoned it a year ago when the new system came online farther south. The equipment left behind is supposed to be dead. No power, no comms, but the drives are still sensitive. Sensitive how? Stone asked. Legacy encryption keys, another intel specialist answered, rubbing her hands together for warmth. Some of them still cross-reference with systems in theater. Not supposed to, but the update cascades behind. If hostile forces get their hands on those drives and manage to brute force anything. So they won't just have an old view, Stone said. They'll have our new lenses too. She nodded, or enough to fake it convincingly. Stone looked back at the map. Tracks were marked in different colors. Known friendly routes, heavy machinery trails, suspected enemy paths. One valley in particular was highlighted, the line snaking through it marked with the planned patrol, route in blue. Enemy activity? He asked. The first intel officer shrugged, uncomfortable. Probing attacks on outlying sensor towers, nothing committed. A few mortars lobbed in, nothing major. We've also logged some unusual signal activity in the region. Short bursts, frequency hopping, then silence. Could be testing a new system, could be noise. Could be, Stone repeated, tasting the word. It had always bothered him, how easily uncertainty could be boxed up and labeled as background noise whenever people were too busy to look closer. We're stretched, the officer said defensively. New drone corridor to the east, resupply convoys on the main pass. Everyone wants feeds and eyes. This listening post job is important, but it's not the only fire burning. Stone's gaze lingered on the blue line through the valley. You're sure about this route? Cleared last month. The officer tapped again. Satellite coverage is good. No heat signatures in the last sweep. It's the most direct path that keeps the convoy under the ridge lines and out of line of sight from known enemy overwatch positions. Known, Stone said. The word hung there. Across the base, in a cramped analysis room that had once been a storage container, someone hunched over a stack of imagery prints, a pencil between her fingers leaving faint graphite scars wherever she paused. The fluorescence overhead buzzed. A small electric heater rattled in the corner. She studied a grainy overhead shot of the same valley the intel team was discussing. The satellite had caught it on a clear day, shadows long and blue across the snow. The contour lines were implied by the way those shadows fell. She didn't need the extra map. She could feel the slope in her bones. She drew a thin grid across the image, dividing it into squares. In the margins, she wrote numbers, distances, angles, rough wind patterns she inferred from the shape of drifted snow. On one sheet, she circled a patch of snow near the old listening post. Faint tracks came in from the north, vehicle width. They ran for 30 meters, then simply vanished. No turnaround, no fan of confused tire marks. She circled the blankness more than once, the pencil pressing hard enough to tear the paper. Why'd you stop with that one? A voice asked from the doorway. She didn't look up immediately. Habit. Finish the mark, complete the thought. Then she turned. Stone filled the narrow doorway, shoulders nearly touching both sides. He held a mug of coffee in one hand, steam curling up past his face. Sir, she said automatically, starting to push the imagery aside. Don't shuffle on my account, he said, stepping in. He nodded at the heater. This thing working, or are you just keeping for the noise? It takes the edge off, she said. Sometimes. He put the mug on the nearest clear patch of desk and leaned over, eyes scanning the detail notation. Range estimates, Wind shadows indicated by short arrows near ridges. Notes about likely machine gun nests that no one had asked her to identify. "You're an admin, right?" he asked. "Paperwork taskings." "That's what my file says," she said. He smiled faintly at the non-answer, then pointed at the circled blank near the listening post. "Tell me what you see there." "Tire tracks that end where they shouldn't," she said. "They come in from the north. No exit. No sign of anything heavy enough to airlift whatever drove in. No ground scarring from winches, nothing." "Snowstorm?" he suggested. "Snow would cover everything, not just the outbound trail," she said. "And the wind doesn't swirl that way there. The ridgeline blocks it. You get laminar flow along the valley, not eddies this deep. Something got out of there that doesn't leave obvious tracks." He studied her for a moment. "You think they buried something?" "I think someone went to a lot of trouble to make one path look normal and the other path look non-existent," she said. "And if I wanted to lure a patrol into a specific place, I'd leave just enough clues in my favor and erase the rest." He tapped the valley image itself. "Could you walk me through this route they've picked?" She did. She traced the planned approach with a pencil, marking ranges to potential firing points. Here, the valley narrows. The walls steepen, and the snow accumulates in shallow berms that look like cover but aren't. You get an L shape around this bend. Anyone moving through is under fire from at least 270 degrees if the enemy's placed right. He nodded slowly. "Textbook kill box. In a textbook, you're reading about it after the fact," she said quietly. His eyes flicked to her face. "You've been in one?" Her mind flashed back to that summer lane, to dirt spitting up around boots, to the impossible feeling of running through someone else's mistake. The instructor's contempt afterward had stuck even deeper than the fear. "Once," she said. "Not like this, but once." "I read your file," he said. "Says you failed basic training. Says you broke formation during a live-fire drill." "That's the official language," she said carefully. "It's not wrong. It's just not complete." A shadow crossed the doorway. A staff officer poked his head in, holding a folder. "Sir, briefing's in 10. Also, if that's who I think it is, she's not exactly our best option for anything outside the wire." Stone glanced back. Meaning she couldn't follow simple commands in controlled environments, the officer said. "We have actual qualified snipers on the roster. Pull one of them if you need overwatch. Don't drag a washout up a mountain." The word landed like a stone in the small room. Stone didn't look away from her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Kara," she said. "Kara Holt." "Holt," he said, tasting it. "How often do you do this?" She frowned. "Sir," he gestured at the maps. "These range cards, the notes, the grids. Is this a hobby, or has someone actually told you to fill your time with this instead of whatever admin you're supposed to be doing?" She hesitated. "I finished my assigned work early. This helps me understand what we're asking people to walk into." "Does anyone read them?" he asked. The staff officer snorted. "Sir, with respect, we have a process for—" Stone held up a finger. The man fell silent. "Sometimes," Kara said. "Sometimes people look. Mostly they end up in a folder." Stone picked up one of the sheets, the one with the circle blank near the listening post. He studied it, then the valley, then Kara again. "On that ridge above the route," he said slowly, "if I put you there with a rifle, could you watch this valley for me?" The staff officer's eyebrows climbed. "Sir, this is ridiculous. We have trained." "I've seen her groups on the range," Stone said quietly. "Tighter than they have any right to be for someone who failed basic." Kara felt heat in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the heater. "It's different out there," she said. "Wind, cold, fatigue, all of it. Paper targets don't shoot back. And yet you still write down the wind patterns," he said. "You still think about angles." The staff officer shook his head. "If this goes sideways, and anyone finds out you put a washout with a bolt rifle on your high ground." Stone set the imagery down. "If it goes sideways and I don't have eyes on that valley, we'll have bigger problems than paperwork," he said. "Get me hold on my manifest as Overwatch." Quietly, Kara blinked. "Sir, I'm not on any roster. Consider this a temporary reassignment," he said. "On that ridge, I don't want someone who passed a checklist. I want someone who notices what everyone else ignores." Hours later, on the flight line, Kara stood in a row of bundled figures in the flat gray of pre-mission light. She checked her rifle one more time, fingers routine on metal and polymer. The scope was old, a glass she knew better than some of the faces on this base. A hairline chip near the lower corner caught the light. She adjusted it out of her primary view. Limited ammo, the armorer had said apologetically. Lift capacity's a joke up there right now. Everyone wants their slice. You get what you can carry. What she could carry fit into a small chest rig and a pack she could still climb in. The patrol and tech team boarded one helicopter. She boarded another, smaller bird that would drop her on a spur overlooking the approach to the listening post. In the cargo bay, the world was nothing but vibration and deafening noise. Her thoughts narrowed to packing lists, ascent routes, contingency plans. When the ramp dropped, the cold hit like a wall. Her boots sank into fresh powder as she stepped off into a world of white and rock and sky. She climbed to her position in silence, breath puffing in steady clouds. On the ridge, she built her hide into the snow, ground cloth laid, rifle settled on its rest. Through the scope, the route unfolded below, the valley's geometry exactly as she'd traced it in pencil. She saw faint lines in the snowdrifts, too straight to be wind-carved, too regular to be chance. Here and there, patches of untouched snow sat where animal tracks should have crisscrossed. Wires? Buried cables? She couldn't prove it from here, but the pattern made the hair on the back of her neck stir. She keyed her radio, the wind halfway, stealing her words. Overwatch to Torch 1. Recommend you slow your approach at grid. A young voice answered, crisp and tight. Copy your concern, Overwatch, but higher clear the route. We're already behind schedule. We'll stay alert. The valley constricts, she said. Berms look like cover, but they're shallow. It's a perfect. Understood. The platoon leader cut her off. Appreciate the input. We've done this before. The transmission ended. She sat back, jaw tight. On her laminated range card, she marked a thin line where the valley walls pinched. Then, almost as an afterthought, she drew a small cloud icon near the upper corner. A bank of gray was rolling in on the horizon, slow but steady. Visibility would change. So would wind. She wrote the time next to the cloud, a reminder that the mountains were as much an enemy as whoever might be waiting in them. Then, for a while, nothing happened. The patrol emerged in the distance, small figures in motion. She tracked their progress, checked her zero, breathed, waited. Later, in the kill zone, when the world erupted, it did so exactly where her pencil had warned it would. The patrol's boots squeaked and crunched as they moved deeper into the valley. Rifles up, eyes scanning. The sky had that washed-out brightness that made it impossible to tell time by light. Sound came too clearly, and yet not clearly enough. Feels like walking in the bottom of a drain, one of the soldiers muttered, breath pluming. Eyes up, Stone called from the middle of the formation. It's just geography. From her hide, Kara watched their spacing shrink. The walls steepened, creeping inward. The snow berms grew more pronounced, like the valley was trying to offer shelter it didn't really have. Her finger hovered near her push-to-talk. Torch 1, you're entering the... The first machine gun cut her off, its roar cascading down the rock. She saw the muzzle flash before anyone below. In that microsecond, she watched one of the patrol scouts register confusion, then impact, then nothing. She couldn't stop the ambush, but she could shape it. She found the gun, called its distance, adjusted. Backblast from mortars puffed behind the enemy line. Overhead, the tiny, insect shape of a drone drifted into view, its camera, eye black and unblinking. Static hit her headset, a full-spectrum growl that swallowed every voice on the net. She flinched, then ripped the earpiece slightly away, letting the sound become background noise instead of a paralyzing scream. On the valley floor, Stone turned his head, lips moving around words no one heard. He tried different frequencies, different call signs, but each attempt died in the same rush of interference. The drone dipped, corrected, circled. Somewhere beyond Kara's view, an enemy command node watched its feed, adjusting fires, refining the storm. Kara tracked one of the machine gun teams, then shifted to the enemy sniper, then backed down as the radio man struggled to move. Choices piled on each other. Each one had a cost she could feel through the metal of the trigger. When she dropped the gunner threatening the medic, she felt more than heard the change in the battle's rhythm. Invisible as she was, she'd stepped into the story. Mortars answered. They walked closer, punching holes into the snow around the patrol's shallow cover. Stone pressed himself lower, doing quick math. Fields of fire, casualty potential, time to neutralize versus time they didn't have. On the ridge, Kara checked her watch again. The exfil window was bleeding away. The cloud bank she noted was already crawling over the far peaks, flattening the light, promising worse to come. She tried a backup channel to the aircraft designated for extraction. Raptor, this is Overwatch. Torch 1 is in heavy contact. The reply was a ghost, tinny and broken. Copy, repeat, you're unreadable. The jamming was thick, layered. Whoever had set this trap had done their homework. Through her scope, she scanned beyond the muzzle flashes, looking for something that didn't move like a gunner or a loader. She found him on the reverse slope, bulkier clothing, an odd antenna sprouting from a pack beside him, a laptop screen hooded to keep the glare off. The enemy commander, or at least someone important enough to stand still and point. He was talking into a headset, the hand not holding the radio, gesturing with almost lazy authority. Around him, men and women in mismatched winter gear worked with casual efficiency. A large metal case, with cables running from it, hummed softly, its lights blinking in a rhythm that didn't care whether anyone on the valley floor lived or died. Kara's finger found the trigger, then stopped. From her current angle, the commander was partially shielded by rock. She would have to thread a shot through a gap that was barely there, risk a ricochet, risk wasting a round she couldn't spare. She switched back to the immediate fires threatening the patrol. Not ideal, not strategic, but she wasn't about to watch someone bleed out just because the bigger play was tempting. She made another kill, then another. Each time she fired, the enemy adjusted. Their guns swept higher. The drone shifted. Another mortar landed closer to the patrol, showering them in frozen debris. A fragment tore into one soldier's leg. The medic cursed, reaching for a tourniquet with blood-smeared fingers. Staying here is containment, not victory, Kara murmured, more to the wind than to anyone else. I can't win from this angle. She let her eye drift from the scope, just for a moment, to survey the ridge line with naked vision. Above and beyond her hide, the mountain climbed again, then curled over into a snow cornice that overlooked the enemy's rear. Between here and there was a gully carved by ancient meltwater, steep enough to make the average person reconsider their life choices. Her gaze tracked the line of ascent. Handholds, ledges, places where snow would be trustworthy and where it would only pretend. The gully would spit her out directly above the enemy command node if she survived the climb. Protocol whispered in her ear in the voice of that basic training instructor and a dozen manuals. The sniper's value lies not only in shots taken, but in presence. Do not unmask. Do not move unnecessarily. Do not risk the overwatch position. In the valley, a soldier screamed as a round hit closer than the last. Kara keyed a local frequency, one even the jammer couldn't entirely crush at this range. Torch 1, this is Overwatch. I'm changing nests. I'll be off scope for a bit. Now is not the time for a scenic hike. Stone's voice snapped back, ragged but still carrying steel. The interference chewed his words at the edges. We need your fire right where you are. From here I'm playing whack-a-mole, she said. I can't see their command node, can't see their jammer, can't see the mortars they're bringing up. They're fighting us like a rehearsal. If I don't change my vantage, this is just delaying. A burst of static. Then, faintly, you confident in the new position? She looked at the gully again, heart rate ticking up just from tracing the path with her eyes. Confident it's where I need to be, she said. Less confident about gravity's feelings. There was a pause, so long she thought the net had died altogether. Then Stone came back, voice lower. Do it, and come back alive. That's an order. Copy, she said. She broke down her hide piece by piece, as much as the situation allowed. No time for perfection. She packed what she could carry and left the rest, Knowing any trace she left might eventually tell someone where she'd been, how she'd thought. Then she stepped out from the hollow she'd carved, and for the first time since sunrise, there was nothing between her and the valley wind. Enemy rounds probed her old nest, sending sparks from rock and carving channels in snow. They were guessing, not yet precise, but their guesses were getting closer. She moved along a narrow rock ledge, shoulders brushing stone, boots testing each patch for purchase. Below, the valley noise was a muffled roar. Up here, every sound, her own breathing, the scrape of fabric against rock, the tiny clink of metal, felt magnified. A tracer arced toward her general area, passing high, close enough that she heard a hiss. Chunks of ice popped from the cliff where it struck. She pressed herself flatter, counted 3 breaths, then moved when the machine gun below paused to reload. The gully's mouth loomed, a shadowed notch filled with snow that had nobody's best interests at heart. She anchored her rope, tested it twice, then started climbing. The first half was straightforward. Hands into snow, crampons biting where they could, axe picks finding purchase in hidden cracks. Her muscles warmed quickly under the strain, heat blooming under layers. Halfway up, a chunk of rock she'd trusted betrayed her. It broke away with a sharp crack, her left hand losing its grip. She swung out on the rope, slamming into the opposite wall. Pain flared along her ribs, then blossomed into the awareness of another sound. A brittle snap near her shoulder. She looked down and saw, with a sinking feeling, that the impact had knocked her rifle hard against stone. The scope's already imperfect corner had taken another hit. A new crack ran through the glass, bisecting the reticle's edge. Perfect, she grunted, teeth clenched. For a moment, she hung there, boot tips scrabbling for purchase, breath coming too fast. The old instructor's words came back, unbidden. You move out of line, you're a liability. You'll get people killed. On the valley floor, that might have been true. Here, on this wall, it was the opposite. You move, and you might be the only reason anyone survives, she told herself. She forced her boots back into the snow, found a new anchor, reset the axe. One hand over the other, one breath after the next. Midway through the second half of the climb, the wind picked up without warning. It howled down the gully, whipping loose snow into a sideways storm. Visibility dropped to a few feet. The world became white and the occasional dark slash of rock inches from her face. For a moment, disorientation threatened. Up and down weren't concepts, they were guesses. Her rope shook, her grip burned. Then she realized what the storm also meant: concealment. From below, no one would see her silhouette against the wall now. The drone's camera, if it happened to sweep this way, would find only a flickering smear of static snow. She dug her axes in deeper, using the wind's fury as a distraction for the enemy instead of letting it become one for her. When she finally crested the cornice, she did it flat, rolling on her stomach, chest heaving, snow packing in her collar. She lay still for a full minute, letting her heart come down, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Gunfire distant but steady. The flatter boom of mortars setting up. Someone shouting orders in a language she didn't speak. Anger carried by tone more than words. She crawled forward, keeping her profile low, and peered over the lip. The battlefield rearranged itself into a new map. The valley floor was still a churned mess of smoke and snow in motion. The patrol's positions were smeared gray and black, their figures barely visible. But from here, she could see behind the enemy's line. The jammer's antenna poked up from a camouflage case like a skeletal tree, cables running into a shelter hollow. The enemy commander stood near it, binoculars lowered now, attention flipping between the drone feed on his laptop and the reports crackling in his ear. A mortar team hastily placed tubes on a flattish shelf, stacking rounds too close to each other, in too much of a hurry to care about textbook spacing. She dug a shallow pit into the snow, elbow deep, creating a platform. Her bipod sank too easily. She cursed under her breath, pulled her pack around, and used it as an improvised rest instead, burying it in front of her, pressing the rifle into it until it felt steady. She brought the scope up, squinting past the cracks. The fracture had shifted her point of aim. She could see that in the way the reticle no longer sat perfectly centered. There was no time and no clean way to re-zero. All she had was memory. How far off her last emergency shot had landed when the chip first appeared, what corrections she'd made on the fly. She compensated mentally, adjusted the turrets 2 clicks down, 1 click right, trusting muscle memory and experience where science would have preferred a range and cardboard. Her hand slipped in her glove again and turned it palm up. On the back, in black marker, she drew a quick ladder. 6 numbers. 6 targets. Sniper. Drone op. Jammer. HMG. RPG. CMD. 6 threats that determined the shape of this fight. Her magazines, when she counted them, gave her barely twice that number of rounds. Some room for error, but not much. Not enough for indulgence. Below, the medic finally reached the fallen radio man. Kara watched him roll the man over, saw the pool of red beneath. The long-range set on the radio man's back was shot through. Fried circuits, shattered casing. No resurrection possible. Pinned so tight they could barely move, the patrol had become more hope than action. Kara settled behind her rifle, the wind scouring the ridge, and whispered a mantra into the scope. This time, she said, I don't stand still and watch someone freeze. Not for a checklist. Not for an order. Not for anything. She found the Overwatch sniper first. He lay on a shelf of rock, rifle pointed down, scope focused on the patrol's last viable path of retreat. From down below, he'd been nearly invisible. From here, his angle betrayed him. She took up the trigger in stages, letting her heartbeat settle between each millimeter. The shot rode the wind, then found bone. The sniper's body jerked, rolled, and slumped against his rifle. 1. She slid the bolt, chambered the next round. The drone operator stood near a fold-out screen, his attention glued to the image rendered there. The drone itself drifted in and out of cloud, its wings rocking slightly. She waited. When the drone tipped into a patch of thicker cloud, its camera blinded for a heartbeat, she fired. The operator folded backward, the laptop skidding across snow. The drone's path wobbled, then drifted, its orbit now dictated by programming instead of a mind. 2. Shouts erupted below. Heads turned, hands pointed. Someone hauled a light machine gun into position, angling it toward the cornice where she lay. A small team broke away, rifles slung, packs loaded with climbing gear. They ran for a different gully, intent on hunting the ghost on the ridge. Kara breathed out, shifted her aim. The jammer's antenna was a thin silhouette against the rock. At its base were metal met housing, a technician knelt, fiddling with cables. She aimed not at flesh this time, but the small gap where stress would do the most damage. She fired. The antenna snapped with a sharp metallic jerk. The technician cried out, grabbing at it as sparks spat from the broken connection. In her ear, the static stuttered. For a glorious, incomplete second, a voice punched through. Torch 1, say again last, we are, copies, heavy contact. Kara's lips twitched. 3. Stones seized the opening. Raptor, this is Torch 1, he shouted in his mic. We're in a prepared ambush. Valley grid as briefed. Troops in contact. Multiple casualties requesting immediate extract at emergency LZ Bravo. The reply was weak but there. Torch 1, Raptor copies, vectoring to your position. Smoke on the deck when in sight. On the enemy side, the commander stiffened, ripping his earpiece away, shouting orders. The mortar team scrambled faster, dropping rounds into tubes at a rate that made safety officers in another universe wince. The climbers bent their backs into the ascent, axes biting, ropes hissing, as they began their own dangerous dance with the mountain. Kara's world narrowed to the next rung on the ladder. The heaviest machine gun team sat in a shallow dugout that enfilade the patrol's only viable path toward the emergency pickup zone Stone had just named. The gun's barrel already glowed faintly, heat bleeding into cold. She timed her shot between bursts. The gunner caught the round in the upper chest, spinning sideways. The assistant gunner lunged for the grips, training drilled too deep to ignore. Kara's a second shot, a fraction rushed, clipped him at the base of the neck. He toppled backward, the gun's barrel swinging harmlessly high, sending rounds into empty sky. 4. Stone didn't need a radio to know the moment had come. He felt the lift in enemy fire, the slight uncoiling of the valley's grip. "Smoke out," he roared. Grenades arced, popped, and blossomed into clouds of colored smoke. Under that thin veil, broken and riddled with holes, but better than nothing, the patrol began to move by bounds, dragging their wounded, stumbling through drifts deeper than their knees. Kara's scope snapped to the next threat. The RPG cell had found a vantage point that looked down over the rocky spur Stone was racing toward. From there, a single well-placed rocket could turn a helicopter into a smoking crater and a morale victory into a global headline. The grenadier crouched behind a boulder, watching the valley, launcher across his knees. A spotter beside him scanned the air with binoculars. Kara counted her breaths. The grenadier started to rise, bringing the launcher to his shoulder, angling it to lead a bird not yet in sight, but inevitable in his mind. The shot took him just under the chin. He fell backward, the launcher clattering from his grip. The spotter flinched, reaching for him, exposing himself in turn. Kara let him live. She didn't have the luxury of follow-ups that weren't on her ladder. 5. Below, the drone, now on its pre-programmed path, swung wide. Its camera, still functioning if aimless, caught a glint on the ridge, sunlight refracting off a cracked scope lens. The feed piped down to the enemy's damaged command node. The commander saw the brief flash and reacted instantly, jabbing a finger at the cornice. He barked an order. The first team of climbers adjusted their line, angling more directly for her position. A second team picked up gear and ran for another access, planting a pincer. On the ridge, bullets began to rake the cornice, chunks of snow and ice shearing away, tumbling down the slope. Kara pulled back an inch, enough to let the worst pass over her head, not enough to lose sight of what mattered. She glanced at her glove. Her tally marks had been joined by smaller notes. Wind corrections, improvised dope for the damaged scope. She counted her remaining rounds, fewer than fingers on one hand, plus the ones already in the rifle. In the valley, a mortar round landed sickeningly close to the temporary cover the patrol had seized on their way to the extraction spur. The blast threw 2 soldiers to the ground. One didn't get back up. The other tried, failed, then tried again. The mortar crew was getting faster, more accurate. Their lead stood over the tube, headset on, map at his feet. He read off adjustments, each one dragging the barrage closer to where Stone was trying to stack his people for pickup. The helicopters were coming. Kara could hear their distant thump, feel the faint vibration through the snow. She knew that if the mortars weren't silenced, the pilots would have no choice but to wave off. No extraction, no second chance. The enemy's propaganda dream will be back on schedule. She shifted her aim yet again, heart rate climbing. This next shot couldn't be a miss. It couldn't even be a graze. She was running out of time, of ammunition, of luck. The mortar lead bent to check something on the map, hand tracing a line, then lifted his radio to his mouth. Kara's finger settled on the trigger. She judged the distance through the veil of blowing snow, made a mental adjustment for the way the wind guttered in this particular pocket, for the new distortion in her scope's glass. She fired. The lead went down, body folding at the spine, radio tumbling from his hand. For a heartbeat, the crew around him froze, instincts warring with training. One reached for him, another grabbed for the map. Confusion spread like a slow detonation. Kara's bolt cycled almost on its own. She lined up on the stack of mortar rounds piled too close, too casually. Regulations said they should be spaced apart. Necessity had said otherwise. Her last dedicated heavy round slipped through the cold air and punched into that unsafe stack. The explosion was vicious. It seemed to suck the sound out of the valley for a second, then returned everything at twice the volume. Snow and rock and fragments of metal and flesh went skyward. The mortar pit ceased to exist as a coherent concept. Below, enemy fighters ducked, staggered. Some went down outright. Others flung their arms over their heads. The commander's laptop went flying as he stumbled backward. His headset tore free. He shouted, but whatever orders he tried to give were lost in the chaos. Cohesion broke. Some of the enemy turned and ran, instincts overriding commands. Others fired wildly in the general direction of the ridge, hoping to hit something, anything. A few stared, stunned, as if the mountain itself had turned against them. The helicopters roared over the nearest ridge line, rotors beating the air into submission. They were dark shapes against a pale sky, skids searching for a place to land, noses already pointed toward danger. On the valley floor, Stone waved smoke grenades, marking the landing zone with bright-colored plumes. The patrol pushed the last of the wounded forward, bodies moving with that peculiar combination of exhaustion and adrenaline that meant there was nothing left in reserve. On the ridge, the climbers were close now. Kara could hear their axes chopping, could see the first helmet cresting a lower ledge. She had 2 rounds left in her mags, plus whatever was in the chamber. She let the helicopters exist as peripheral awareness. Her world became the lip of the cornice and the dark shapes trying to reach it. The first climber's hand emerged, fingers clawing for purchase. She fired, the bullet shattering Stone an inch from his glove, sending shards into his face. He lost his grip with a startled yell, swung, then slammed into the wall. The second climber tried to compensate, rope biting into his harness. Kara sent her next shot into the rope's anchor point instead, not trusting herself to pick a headshot in the roiling snow. The anchor cracked. The line snapped. Both climbers dropped, their screams lost in the noise of rotors and explosions. The remaining climbers farther down scrambled to arrest the fall, tangling ropes, slamming into rock. The entire effort devolved into a knot of flailing bodies sliding downslope. Chunks of the cornice had been chewed up by enemy fire. Kara looked at one particularly precarious overhang, at the spider web fissures running through it. No ammo to waste. Fine. She holstered her rifle, rolled awkwardly, and drove both boots into the fractured mass of snow, pushing with everything she had. The cornice section gave way with a groan, then broke off entirely. It slid for a second, gained speed, and then became an avalanche in miniature, sweeping down the gully, taking loose rock, ice, and unlucky climbers with it. She lay back, panting, her whole body trembling from more than exertion. Below, the first helicopter flared, nose high, skids touching down for only a second. Soldiers shoved the most critical wounded aboard. The bird lifted, pivoted, then circled for altitude, presenting its armored side to the valley walls. Enemy fighters tried one last rocket attack, but without spotting, without mortar support, their shots went wild, streaking past the helicopters into empty snow fields. The second bird came in, hovering rather than landing, rotors throwing up a blizzard. Stone pushed the last of his people toward it, hand on one soldier's back, half dragging another by their harness. He was the last to approach the open door. At the threshold, he turned, scanning the ridge. He couldn't see her, not really. From down there, her hide was just another wrinkle in the mountain skin. But he looked anyway, eyes narrowing, as if he could feel her gaze through the glass between them. Kara lifted one hand, just slightly, then let it fall. The helicopter rose, banking away, engine straining. The valley shrank beneath it, becoming lines and shapes again, the details blurred by distance and the snow the rotors had kicked up. On the enemy's side, survivors dragged their wounded away from smoldering equipment. The jammer lay broken, antenna snapped. The mortar pit was a crater. The laptop that had once shown their would-be victory flickered, then went dark. The valley, for the moment, belonged to no one. Back at the forward base, the snow looked no cleaner for what had just been paid into it. Survivors sat on stretchers outside the medical tent, blankets around their shoulders for lines taped to bare hands. Their faces were drawn, wind-burned, eyes sunk deep in exhausted sockets. A row of body bags lay a few meters away, zippered, snow dusting their dark surfaces. The sound of departing helicopters thumped faintly through the air, a ghost of their earlier roar. Inside the briefing room, the light was harsher. Projectors threw images onto a screen. The recovered drone, burned and broken. The twisted remains of the jammer. Hard drives salvaged from the enemy command node, now tagged and logged. Intel officers spoke in measured voices about what was on those drives. Encryption keys, both old and new. Plans to splice captured data into forged streams to make friendly networks see what the enemy wanted them to see. Designs for a broadcast, partially scripted, that would have shown captured soldiers on their knees in that valley, used as proof that a Western patrol could be humiliated in broad daylight. The objective wasn't just to kill a dozen of our people, one analyst said softly. It was to take Stone alive if possible, get the technicians, take the drives, and turn the whole thing into a spectacle. Break trust in our systems and our leadership in one stroke. Stone sat at the table, hands clasped loosely in front of him. His knuckles were scraped raw. Dried blood, his or someone else's, darkened the cuff of his sleeve. And instead, he said, they got smoked by their own mortars and chased off the field while our washout sat on a ridge and took their plan apart. No one in the room challenged his word choice this time. In a smaller side room, down the hall, away from the maps and slides, Kara sat alone. Her rifle lay disassembled on the table in front of her. Her hands moved over it in familiar patterns, cleaning carbon from the bolt, checking the stock for new cracks, inspecting the battered scope with a kind of reluctant affection. Every time she blinked, she saw something from the valley. The way the radio man's body had slumped. The moment the mortars had blossomed too close. The instant that rope had snapped and the climbers had fallen. The faces of the men and women who had made it onto the helicopters. The ones who hadn't. Her fingers shook slightly when she reached for the oil. She steadied them with a breath. The door opened without a knock. Stone stepped in, closing it behind him. He carried a thin folder, the edges already soft from handling. You look like the heater in here's not doing much, he said. It's working, she said, just not on the right things. He pulled out the chair opposite hers and sat. For a moment, he simply watched her reassemble the rifle. Scope took a beating, he observed. So did I, she said. Scope's easier to fix. He slid the folder across the table until it touched the muzzle end of the rifle. Read this when you're ready, he said. She hesitated, then flipped it open. The first page was a simple summary. Engagement at Grid Sierra 7, date, time, participating units. Below that, a section labeled Overwatch, primary. Her name was there. Not as administrative assistant, unqualified. Not as trainee, failed. As Holt, Kara, primary Overwatch, successful under fire. The paragraph that followed detailed her actions in clinical language. Identification of kill zone geometry, early warning attempts, engagement of key enemy force multipliers, coordination with ground element for extraction. Casualties avoided, casualties sustained. It wasn't flowery. It wasn't designed for public consumption, but it was accurate in a way the word failure had never been. This isn't official, she said quietly. I mean, it's not signed, stamped. Paperwork takes time, he said. Perception takes longer. But this is the record that matters to me, and to anyone who cares more about what happened than what a file once said. He leaned back, studying her. You know why I pulled you out of that analysis room in the first place? You were desperate, she said, half a joke, half defense. I was curious, he said. Your maps, your notes, the way you look at terrain like it's a living thing try to trick you. That live fire story in your file? They wrote it up like insubordination. I read it and thought, here's someone who will move out of line if the line is about to walk into an ambush. She swallowed. It cost me everything then. It saved lives now, he said. Same instinct, different stage. She closed the folder, fingers resting on the cardboard. It didn't save everyone. He didn't flinch. No, he said. It didn't. That's the part they don't put in the recruitment ads. You could do everything right and still lose people. But there's a corridor between losing some and losing all. You held that corridor today. She looked over at the casualty list pinned to the wall. Names in black marker. She found the radio man's name, the one she'd watched fall. Her throat tightened. I keep seeing them, she said. The ones who didn't make it onto the bird. Good, Stone said. She blinked, startled. Good. The day you stop seeing them, stop feeling that weight. is the day. I don't want you on my ridge, he said softly. We honor them by remembering. We honor them by doing better next time, not by pretending the cost doesn't exist. He gave her a moment, then continued. There's another reason I came in here, besides hand-delivering a draft report. She waited. There's a mountain reconnaissance and sniper element being stood up, he said. We expect more of this kind of terrain, more of this kind of fight. They need someone who sees what others miss. Someone who's willing to climb into impossible angles because the math demands it, not because the orders are neat. She stared down at the rifle, at the worn places on the stock where her hands naturally rested. Someone who passes basic? She asked, the old bitterness surfacing out of habit. He shook his head. Someone who has rewritten what basic even means, he said. The admin label on your record will get adjusted. Quietly. Some people will grumble. Let them. They weren't in that valley. Is this an order? She asked. It's an invitation, he said. You can say no. No one will drag you back onto a ridge. She thought of the analysis room, the humming heater, the stacks of imagery no one read. She thought of the valley, the feeling of being the thin line between someone living and someone being used as footage on a hostile broadcast. I don't want to be the reason someone else freezes in place and dies, she said. Then don't be, he said. Come do the job where it matters most. She closed the folder fully, the edges biting into her palms. Okay, she said. I'm in. He stood, leaving the folder on the table. We'll get you new glass, he said, nodding at the battered scope. Maybe even let you pick it yourself. I've grown attached to this one, she said. It's been through some things. So have you, he said. And you're still here. After he left, she sat for a long time, listening to the distant bass noises, the occasional clatter of a truck, the low murmur of voices in the hall. Eventually, she reassembled the rifle completely, running a final cloth along the barrel. She slung it across her back and stepped out into the cold. The sky had cleared some. The mountains were closer in the crisp air, their edges carved sharp against the pale blue. The snowfield outside the tent was a patchwork of tracks, boots, stretcher sled rails, the rounded marks where body bags had been carried. As she walked, a few of the patrol members lifted their heads. No one cheered. No one saluted. One soldier, a bandage wrapped around his head, gave her a small nod, eyes steady. Another touched 2 fingers to his chest, and then to the sky. A quiet acknowledgement. She returned the nod, nothing more, because anything louder would have felt wrong. The wind picked up, carrying the faint thump of helicopters departing on other tasks. It tugged at her hood, at the rifle sling, at the edges of the world. She walked toward the edge of the base, toward the perimeter where the wire ended and the white, waiting mountains began again. Her boots left prints that the wind immediately started to soften. Somewhere in a file cabinet or a digital archive, a line that once said failed basic would be edited, annotated, overwritten. So people would see the new words. Others would cling to the old. On paper, she once failed basic. In truth, on a ridge in a kill zone that should have been a death sentence, she had examined who she was and chosen again. One step at a time, she walked into the blowing snow, the valley behind her, other ridges ahead, and the knowledge that when it counted, she would be there, silent, breathing, watching, ready to rewrite the story one shot at a time.